Business athletes, what is going on? Welcome back to yet another episode 38. And this is a continuation of episode 37, actually. So it's part 2 of 2. So part 1, episode 37, was the mental game, how to stay strong when life isn't going your way. And then the subtitle to that was how to win when everything feels like it's falling apart. Man, if that's not relevant to so many people right now, I don't know what is. And so this is going to be part 2. So make sure that you go back and you listen to part 1, because obviously there's a lot of tools, tactics, and concepts that I cover in part 1. You know, one thing that I think is challenging about the mental game is that a lot of people, a lot of coaches, a lot of mentors, a lot of psychologists, they just put a lot of emphasis on the thinking part, on the talking and the thinking. So like you just have to try and think your way out of a problem, brainstorm your way out of it, journal your way out of it, talk your way out of it. And I do think there is a time and place to articulate what you're going through. I do think the mental tactics play a role. They have played a role in my life. You know, I went and got cognitive behavioral therapy for many, many years. Now, in hindsight, do I think that I would have needed it for all of those years? Probably not, but I'm still glad that I did it. I still think it's very useful. I think the reason why it's useful to be in a group, in an ecosystem, in a mastermind, get mentors that you can talk to about your challenges and your problems is that very often they can help illuminate the blind spots to you. So you might be thinking in a certain way that is just so ingrained in your behavior, you can't see the forest for the trees. I've seen this a lot with people. I've seen people who have, you know, maybe growing up their whole life, they've been out of shape, they've never really been successful in life. And a big part of it is they have a really destructive attitude. They're quite negative. And what happens is their negative attitude sort of stunts them and prevents them from solving problems that are, quite frankly, pretty easy to solve. But then beyond that, because of their attitude, they repel any good people out of their life. So they're just very, like, either very lonely, very isolated, or they're around a bunch of other negative Nancys. So the first part of it is I do think talking about mental strategies, mental tools is important. You know, like when I'm talking about habit formation and habit stacking and, you know, different types of mental concepts, I think is important. But I also realize that there are physical levers you can pull too. And in episode 37, I talked about, just to give you a quick summary, I talked about how one of the physical levers I pull multiple times per day is I will walk outside in the sunlight and then send a couple of positive messages to someone. And I just find for whatever reason, the combination of those things, when done often enough, really, really helps with your energy and it really helps with your mental state. And I've seen the fruit of that with other people too, by the way. So I've suggested this many times over the years, and I see people who commit to that. They really do get benefit from it. But you've got to be consistent with it. And then the other things that I'd mentioned, like physical levers, was, you know, do the Braverman test. The Braverman test is a test you can do online that gives you an approximation of your brain chemistry. And then from there, you kind of know, okay, where's my dopamine at? Where's my serotonin at? Where's my acetylcholine and my GABA at? And then based off that, it might say certain neurochemicals are really depleted. And then it will give you some suggestions around foods and supplements that you can add in to start helping with those chemical precursors. That's really valuable. It's definitely worth doing that. The other thing that I think is a physical lever that's worth doing is getting a comprehensive lab panel blood work done. This is where I would come in, you know, reach out to me and get it run. And then what I can do is I can give you feedback on how to structure everything you're doing. Because one of the things that I will say is a lot of the blood work clinics that are available, they give you normal ranges for things, but one of the catches is that normal ranges don't always constitute optimal. A classic example is testosterone. So testosterone in men, the range is about 1,000 through to about 300. Now, if you're down at, say, 320, that would still be normal on your blood panel, so it would come up as a green check mark. Now, that to me is still very suboptimal. Like, you will definitely probably feel negative consequences of being in that zone. And the same thing applies to many different biomarkers, to vitamin D, to thyroid, to DHEA. And so if you have, 3, 4, 5 markers that land within a normal zone but aren't optimal, you will not feel good. You will definitely have an impaired way of feeling. You won't have the same mental grit and tenacity that you could if everything was optimized. So I say this because those are two ways to sort of gauge and assess metrics to really get surgical and physical with exactly what you need to do. And then the other part of it is really reminding yourself that food is like software. And if you're eating a lot of junk food and you're taking a lot of drugs, like you're smoking a lot of cannabis, or you're drinking a lot of alcohol, or you're just using a lot of prescription medications, that will have a really negative effect on your psychology too long term if you do it enough. And that will start to skew the way you perceive things, and that's a problem in and of itself. So I wanted to just kind of revisit some of those things that I talked about in episode 37. I think it's definitely worth to go back and revisit that stuff and really do what you can to lock as many of those suggestions in as possible. Now, one of the things that I realized that I forgot to touch on in that episode, and in fact, it's not that I forgot to touch on it, it's that I realized that these episodes were going to be long and I needed to cut it, so I wanted to come back and address this. And I talked about this idea of expansion and contraction. So in episode 37, I talked about how one of the things I've noticed as like a universal principle in the world is this idea of expansion and contraction. So what is that? So I'll give you some examples. So if we think about the seasons, like winter and summer, right? In winter, everything kind of dies away. The leaves fall off the trees. Everything shrinks down. The flowers fall off and die. The animals go into hibernation. They kind of burrow down and disappear, and they stop moving and they get all sedentary, and everything just kind of contracts inwards on itself. And it can look like death. It can look like things are just dying, when in actuality it's just a different chapter. It's a different transition period. It's a different phase of these expansion and contraction phases. And then obviously as we come into summer, everything blooms, everything expands. The flowers open up and expand. The leaves come out of their little buds and they open up and expand as well. So everything kind of comes to life. The same thing is true for like the sun that all our planets orbit. At a certain point, sun will shrink down and then it opens up and it expands and expands and expands. Like white dwarfs, red giants, expansion and contraction. And you see this with women that are about to give birth to their child. They go through a lot of contractions. It's painful, it's difficult, and then the expansion and the birth and that euphoria that comes with that. Think of the euphoria that comes with coming into summertime when everything comes back to life again. Right? So we can see these expansion and contraction concepts in physics, in nature. And in many ways, I feel like humans are animals too. And so in many ways, we are the same. Now, what I think happens, though, is that there's like collective contractions. So as a race, as a collective, we'll go through contraction periods. And right now, I would say we're going through a very hard contraction period where we're in the first month of the war with Iran. And obviously the economy already wasn't doing fantastically well before that. And now add on all this tension and all this uncertainty and turmoil. And it's a hard contraction period. Like, people are very fearful. People are playing defense. People shrink inwards. They start cutting costs. They start playing defense and sort of think in a very scarcity-minded paradigm. And what can happen is you can get stuck in these contraction phases. That's what happens to a lot of people. So the way that you live is going to almost facilitate more of the same. And equally, think about a time where you've just been on a roll. Think about a time where you were doing really well in your business, sales were just flying in, you're doing really well with your health, you were locked in with your diet, you had a spring in your step, you were doing, everything was like in a flow state. Think about times like that in your life and go back and literally imagine a time like that. You probably have times in your life over the last 5 or 10 years where you can remember certain periods of your life being like a perpetual flow state, where you were doing pretty well for a while. And just think about how awesome that felt. Think about how positive you were. Think about the spring that you had in your step. Think about how it wasn't hard to get up in the morning. You wake up and you're excited. You're excited for the day because you've been doing so well. Think about just the way you interact with people and the positive energy, and you're like, man, I love this. This is great. I can think of times like that. There's been times in the last 3 to 5 years where we were in our RV. So we have a 44-foot fifth wheel, and we use it to travel around the US and explore for a while to try to figure out where we wanted to live. Because we have our house down in Louisiana that we rent out, and we don't want to be in Louisiana long term. And so we were traveling up through Virginia and obviously Tennessee and the Smoky Mountains. And we found some land here in the beautiful Smoky Mountains. But we were staying in this beautiful campground in the heart of the Smoky Mountains called Up the Creek. So Up the Creek RV Camp. And it's a beautiful spot. We were staying in one of the premium spots. It's right by the creek. There's this mountain stream that runs along the back. It's this beautiful grassy knoll area where the kids would play. It's just picturesque. And I just remember walking around there, around the campground, on calls, coaching people. We were doing really well in business. Everything was growing. It felt effortless. I had a lot of good people in the rotation, and I still do. But it's just like a particular time, especially because I remember the environment. And when fall came, it was so beautiful, and like the leaves were orange and red. Imagine waking up in the morning and you have like a mountain stream right there, and the leaves are orange and red, and everything just seems to be clicking into place. And I really cherish times like that. And I will say you can engineer many times like that. It doesn't have to be a one-off event. But equally, there will be times in your life where things are more challenging, where things have been more of a curveball, and you've been punched in the face a bunch, and you might be off your game. Maybe you gained a bunch of weight, or maybe things are not going well in your business, or you've been having arguments with people, and you just feel a lot of tension and conflict. And what can happen is that I find that if we marinate and sit in that energy, and you just like live into it, you create more contraction. And I would say that this is probably one of the hardest things that people inadvertently do, that they need to really work on pattern interrupting. Well, think about when you have a bad day. Let's say you have a bad night or something. You wake up in the morning and you're just feeling low, you're feeling down. Typically, you're not going to get outside and walk in the sun. You might skip the workout. You'll be eating like crap. And because you're doing all those things, you just feel inflamed and you feel puffy and you don't feel very good mentally. So you're not doing the things that you need to do and that you should be doing that you did when you were in your flow state, when you were in your expansion phase. It's like math. If you look back at the things you were doing when you were in an expansion phase, I guarantee you there were things you were doing consistently that were facilitating and breeding that energy. And obviously there are, like I said, macro contractions where like we all go through this sort of collective contraction. If there's like a freaking war or something, that's obviously not a good thing. And then there are micro contractions and expansions. So the world might be relatively calm and you might go through your own personal stuff. Or equally, the goal, I would say the challenge and the goal, and this comes back to that idea of like your self-mastery is to get yourself in a great mood, even on a day where everything's going wrong. And I will tell you that your ability to move into an expansion phase when you've been stuck in a contraction and the collective is stuck in a contraction is absolute power. It's absolute power. So the way I think about it is there's a couple of different things you want to think about when you're sort of observing contraction periods. One is, look at your body language. Typically, when you're in a contraction phase, you're going to be, everything's tight. Your shoulders are dropped down and kind of hunched over. You're shallow breathing. You're feeling very reactive. Like you're not really thinking before you're communicating. You're just thinking reactively and like knee-jerk, getting mad. Everything's based on fear-based decisions. So you're not really playing an offensive, expansive game. You're sort of thinking about saving and cutting costs and preserving things. And sure, I get that in some sense that can be useful. If you're an investor and you're sort of trying to make better decisions, some degree of, sort of playing it cool and playing a little bit of defense is an important part of the equation. But I also think a lot of people, they go too far and everything they do is just based off fear. And what happens is when it's based off fear, you will absolutely create more of the same. And you'll pull back from opportunity. So you'll have opportunities land in your lap where you might have an offer that comes up to do something, and you will pull back and not do it when normally you would have, because you're in such a fearful, contractive state. And a great example, a couple of examples are like, if you're in a good mood and you're making really good money and you see someone that really needs help, like they're in a really tough spot, it feels so good to be able to donate to them and give them money to help them with their cause, help them with their thing, and you just feel like you're in flow. And it feels like it feels easy. Whereas if you've been going through a really challenging season, doing that almost feels wrong. And I would actually say that's what breeds more of the same negative result when you play that contractive energy game. And the same thing is true if people say things like, I can't afford this right now. I'll never be able to afford that. It's too expensive. Like even the wording that people use, rather than saying, okay, that's the price it is, what do I need to do to make this happen? And thinking really creatively about that. There's a level of creative thinking you have to adopt as part of the expansion phases. And I would say a lot of the contraction stuff, you'll notice that maybe you get sick more often. You'll notice that you snack more and your diet's definitely not as clean. You'll notice that you don't train as hard. You'll notice that your step count's not as high. You'll notice that you don't sleep as well. Maybe you stay up late. You drink more. You use more substances. You just distract yourself more on mindless social media and Netflix and YouTube. And when you're in an expansion phase, it's like the opposite to that. You move more, you train harder, you're more connected, you compliment more people, you're more positive around people, you donate to more causes, you move and back yourself and invest in yourself even more. And you don't just invest in yourself. That's one part of the skin in the game. But the other part of the skin in the game is you actually showing up and doing it. Like you actually feel compelled to show up and feel like you want to do it, and you do it. And so what I would tell you is look at your results right now and look at your life. And if things haven't been going well, it's more than likely because you've been living in a state of contractive energy. You've been playing defense, you've been holding back, you've been cutting corners, you've been negative, you've been coming up with all the reasons why it won't work and all the reasons why you need to cut costs and play defense and all the things that we worry about. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to go back to a time where you were in a massive flow state. You were just in a great expansion period, and it felt amazing. Like literally go back to one of those days. I think about one of the days for me, for example, is I had one of my mentors at the time. His name's Jesse Elder. Great guy. I love him. He's changed my life. And I got him to come out because I was one of his one-on-one students. So obviously I'd spent a lot of money investing and coaching with him. And I actually got him to come out to Tennessee and do a private immersion with me. So like a private experience with me where he comes out. And it was great. It was like we sat by the river. We brainstormed business ideas and strategies. Things were going really well. Everything was locked in. The health was good. The family was doing well. He and I were connecting really well. It was like a beautiful day. I just remember the day being really beautiful. And I remember taking him out to our land, and we just got to walk around and talk about the vision. And he is just like so excited for us, and it just felt perfect. And so I go back to days like that. I go back and I close my eyes and I relive those days. What was I talking about? Where was my confidence at? How was I operating? How much procrastination was I giving over ideas and processes? One thing that I think is part of that contraction stuff is you'll be procrastinating a lot more. So if you know that you need coaching, for example, this is a big one, by the way. So a lot of people, they know that they want to get coaching from me, or they know they need it, and they just keep procrastinating. They keep sitting on the fence and like sort of playing mental ping pong with themselves because they feel like and they think that they can't afford it and they can't justify it. And what happens is you keep stuck in that contraction period, and it extends out more and more and more, and often it will get worse, and you start to really struggle. And so the way I think about this is you have to observe your energy in the world, and you have to realize that you're going to go through contraction periods, but it's up to you how quickly those last and how quickly you get back into an expansion phase. So anytime I feel like I've been slipping into a contraction period, I really revisit those perfect days. I revisit those beautiful moments. I think about everything I've achieved so far, and then I say to myself, right, what do I need to do today to start getting back to that alignment with that type of energy, with that type of person? And usually it's a lot of the habits and behaviors and characteristics and things you were doing back then. So you kind of actually intuitively know. So I wanted to share that with you because I would say that that's one of the prime reasons people stay stuck, and especially during larger macro contraction periods where everyone's going through challenges. Because even when there's a lot of people going through challenges, there are still people that thrive. I look to them for answers. I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, like we can never be successful and we can never get in great shape right now and we can never do X, Y, and Z because everything is so bad. I'm like, don't tell me that. Like, I want to look at the people that are doing well and how are they showing up and what problems are they solving and how are they operating, and I will model from them. That's how you need to be thinking. So I would even tell you, one of the best things you could do to get yourself out of a contraction phase is to reach out and get into my coaching tribe. That is an expansion-based decision. It's an expansion-based activity that would start to change that energy around you. And you'll notice that when you do that, you get reinvigorated. You feel more ambitious again. You start tapping into people that are more optimistic. And you'll be amazed at how much that alone can help you. I think another part of it is leveraging nature as a reset button. So one of the things that I talked about on episode 37 was how multiple times through the day I'll go out and take these little walks in the sun, and I'll send little short 30 to 60 second voice notes or audio video messages to about 5 people through the day, where I'm just kind of connecting with them, I'm pouring into them, I'm just giving them some love. And it makes their day. Think about it. When you get a positive message from someone, it makes your day, doesn't it? You might be having a really crappy day, and you get a message from someone saying, hey, I just wanted to say, like, the way that you do that thing or the way that you show up, and I was watching you the other day, I'm just so impressed. I know life's not easy for any of us, but I just wanted to tell you that you make a real difference and you inspire me. You'd be amazed, or even just connecting with someone that you know, and you'd be like, hey, I just wanted to say that I was thinking about you the other day, and I hope that you're doing okay. And feel free to just reach back out and let me know genuinely, how are you doing? There's something powerful about that getting outside your own head, your own problem, your own BS. Like, I find a lot of people that struggle, they're inherently being selfish. They don't like make anyone else's day. They're not reaching out to connect with people. In fact, they often make other people's days worse. That's a common thing. They often bitch and moan and complain and make other people's days worse. That's a really good example of you then getting shafted with a bunch of that negative energy that you've been dishing out. So you really, really have to catch that. Now, this might sound woo-woo to you, but I'm telling you, there aren't super successful, healthy, wealthy, dialed-in people that I see that have a bad attitude. It just doesn't happen. You might have someone that achieves a part of that, but you don't see someone that's like dialed in with their family and they're in great shape and they're doing well in business and they have a bad attitude. It doesn't happen. You might have someone who's in shape and they have a bad attitude and they have terrible relationships, or they might suck at their business. So you can achieve some of that stuff, but you can't achieve all of it unless you have a beautiful attitude most of the time and you course correct as fast as you can. Like you become very aware of your state. Day by day, moment by moment, hour by hour, you become very cognizant of where your energy's at. And if you've drifted into like a low energy state where you're being kind of negative, you know how to course correct very quickly. You don't let it drag out to a whole freaking day. You lock it back in quickly. Now, like I was saying, nature is a great reset too. So part of why some of my best memories are in the Smoky Mountains when we're traveling in the RV. People might think to themselves, oh man, you're living in an RV. Like that's not that appealing. I'd rather live in a big house. And obviously, the way that I think about it is my most valuable perspective is freedom. Like I value freedom. So I value being wherever I want, when I want, with whom I want, on my own terms. And it looks different for everyone. And so that's what I appreciate. And some of my best memories are just exploring out in nature. Because obviously if you're in the RV, you can just step outside and you're usually in a beautiful location. And one of the things I will say is that's part of why we chose to live in the Smoky Mountains, because we wanted to be close to the mountains, close to nature, close to that beauty. And even if you don't necessarily live in a quote-unquote beautiful area, what I would tell you is just getting outside and sitting in your backyard, taking a walk down one of the trails that's by your house, or walk around, drive to the local park. There's probably going to be an area either in your block or around you somewhere where you can walk, and it's decent. Even just being outside. So I definitely think that people don't leverage that outdoor time enough. They just think of it as something that's like nice to do if they have the time, and it often doesn't happen much. So I would tell you that your goal, especially if it's spring coming into summertime at the time of you listening to this, is every day you need to almost like have a checklist of, did I get fresh air and sunlight multiple times per day, and really stack that into your routine and get out. So I'll even go out to our land periodically. I'll go out to the land and reconnect to the vision, because I definitely find that putting yourself in environments where you feel connected to your dream and vision is a very powerful tool. So I would say that, yes, envisioning things and sort of thinking about who you want to be and thinking about what you want to achieve is important. But I would say also beyond that, putting yourself in the environment physically is like a superpower. And so, for example, in a couple of months, I'm hosting a 2-day live event workshop. I don't host many of these anymore. And usually I just do them for like my highest level one-on-one students. But I'm hosting a small group 2-day business athlete elite workshop here in the Smoky Mountains at our house in my superhuman gym. And we'll go out to our land, we'll walk around, we'll connect, we'll talk about business, health, mindset, blood work, diet, strategy. I'll be walking the people through everything. So at the end of that experience, they'll have like an updated roadmap of exactly what they need to do to just 10x their results. And I've seen how valuable that is when people are in the room together and they're around that good energy. So I would say to you, obviously, if you're interested in that, at the time of this recording, you hear this, let me know and I can send you information. There's only going to be 10 spots for that. But I would say putting yourself in the environments. So put yourself on the land, put yourself in the national park, go and do that like vacation where you're in that place that inspires you. That's why mastermind events and workshops and things like that can be so useful, because you get in the right environment. And I would say that's a really powerful bonus tool, coupled with nature as a reset button. The other thing that I think that I kind of touched on yesterday, but I wanted to drill into a little bit more here, was especially right now with a lot of the fear-based media that we're seeing around the war in Iran and everything that's happening, is that you've got to curate your inputs. So if you are just jumping up in the morning, this is probably what the average person does. They wake up, their alarm goes off, they either hit snooze or go straight to social media. They just start scrolling. They just start checking their notifications. They start scrolling. They check their DMs. They check their text messages. They check their emails. And they're just getting bombarded with demands from other people being reactive, people posting stuff that's reactive. And that's just permeating your energy and your mind in a big way. And then you wonder why you feel anxious. You wonder why you feel distracted. You wonder why your focus is way off. It's because you are just like a human garbage disposal for all this digital junk food. So I would tell you, absolutely don't just go scrolling social media right out the gate. When you wake up, drink some water, breathe, have a little prayer or meditation, and then what I do is I pre-select a positive YouTube video the night before, and then I just put that on without even looking. So it's something useful, it's something that I like, it's something interesting, and I just play that. That way I'm not having to make decisions in the morning and try and find something, and I'm kind of rifling around and picking things that are maybe inflammatory or stressful. You know, we see so much fear-based stuff on social media and a lot of inflammatory reactive things. And that's a huge part of your challenge. You know, you will find that when you are feeling overwhelmed, part of that overwhelm is that your aperture is too wide. You know, you're taking in every single problem on planet Earth. You're worried about the Strait of Hormuz, and you're worried about the rockets being launched into Israel, and you're worried about bombs going off at schools, and you're worried about the economy and the price of oil in New Zealand, and you're worried about all these things, and you're worried about your own life and your own bills and your own kids and your own family, because your aperture is so wide. And very often, that wide aperture comes because we almost inadvertently avoid high levels of self-accountability. Rather than really working on our own life and really getting our own house in order and kind of closing down the aperture a little bit, so you're really focusing on your life, your business, your relationships, your health. You're like worried about and consuming a ton of stuff that's like a massive wide aperture on a global level. And part of it is I find that the people that are the more unhealthy and that have less of their life together, they typically adopt that wide aperture, and they're the ones that are like armchair gurus in every geopolitical thing available. They're constantly posting stuff about wars and conflicts and economics and everything, but they're like 50 pounds overweight, and they're broke. And it's like, you've got to pull that aperture back. And part of that is curating your inputs. It doesn't mean that you're ignorant or naive, but it means that when you start your day and you end your day, you've got to be very, very intentional about what you put into your mind. And so I would say during the day, yeah, you'll expose yourself to some of these things. But I would say at the start of the day and the end of the day, you've got to protect it. The other thing that I would say is unfollow people that are just posting tons of inflammatory stuff. Snooze them for 30 days. On Facebook, you can snooze people for 30 days. You can unfollow people so you're still friends with them, but they're just not going to blast your news feed with all their reactive stuff. So you want to remove a lot of the stressful reactive stuff from your news feed. But the other thing you want to do as a positive is interact with positive content more, because the algorithm will serve you up and feed you more positive content. You know, I go and find a lot of photography pages, like Blue Ridge Mountain photography, Smoky Mountain photography, Colorado Rockies photography. Different groups, different pages will have beautiful like environmental locations, barndominiums. I love barndominiums. I love homestead stuff. I like nice houses. So I follow all these things, and I just get like bombarded with all these beautiful images of like mountains and sunsets and the leaves changing and spring coming and barndominiums and beautiful homes with like amazing looking landscaping and all these things. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's awesome. It puts you in a good state. And then obviously, because you're consuming less of the reactive fear-based stuff, it's not pulling that aperture so wide. Because I'm telling you, that will have an effect. It's going to zap your emotional energy, and you're not going to have the same bandwidth to get the work done and do the things that you need to be doing to get you to the next level. And that's what matters most. So I just wanted to share that with you. And the last part of that was you got to turn off your push notifications. When I see people respond to me instantly, I know that their push notifications are turned on. That's a problem. I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter who you are, unless you're like a full-blown customer service representative, where that's your primary job and you're on the clock, there's no reason why you should have push notifications set on your phone. It's going to pull you out of focus and it's going to add stress. So if you are not sleeping well, if you're getting digestive issues from stress and your push notifications are on, there's part of your problem. I notice that because sometimes I will strategically go in and respond to people when I time block it. And then sometimes I'll message them and then they'll instantly respond to me. And I'm like, man, it's trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. As soon as you respond, they message you back. And it's like, dude, relax. You know, I get that, like, you want to sort of have this conversation, but part of it is like, just the fact you can tell how fast they respond means that they're getting push notifications. That's a problem. Now, obviously, every now and then you might be actually time blocking and in their messaging and it just happens to coincide. Great. But I say this because you've got to protect your space. You've got to protect your psychology. And you've got to protect your boundaries, quite frankly. You know, there's going to be people in your life that are either pushy or maybe a bit mentally unstable, or they're struggling in their own ways. And they are overstepping the mark in your life. They're pushing you. They're not respecting your boundaries. Maybe they're doing things that are pissing you off. And it's clear that they don't really have a good grasp of what boundaries look like. If you don't calmly and clearly communicate your boundaries to people when they push up against them, they will start to steamroll you. And then what will happen is that will just make you really resentful and drained. And I would say a lot of people deal with that. A lot of people will have like pushy clients, pushy students, pushy contracts, pushy family members. And because you don't want to rock the boat, or because you want to be seen as a saint, or you want to sort of portray a certain image, you allow that behavior to perpetuate. I remember one of my friends said to me something so insightful one day. He said, look, man, you know, you get these guys come to you and they're these type A personalities. They're pushy, they're kind of rambunctious and loud, and they want everyone to drop what they're doing for them. You know, that's how they sort of become a CEO type in the first place. But they're overweight, they're out of shape, they're the fat Ferrari owners, basically. And he said, look, if you bend over backwards and you don't create boundaries with them, they're going to bring all their bad habits to the relationship with you. And then what happens is they're going to keep getting the same crappy result because they've just brought all their baggage with you. Now, if you hold up clear boundaries to them, clear structure and systems about what you will and will not tolerate and what you expect from them, yeah, sure, there might be a little bit of weird pushback. And that's part of it. But what happens is they know where they stand. They know where they stand. And you need to see it as your obligation to do that because they came to you for the help. And so are you going to help them? And part of that help is sometimes being confrontational. Part of what I do sometimes is I will have to have very firm words with certain students who don't have a good grasp on boundaries. And they'll say or do something, and I'm like, no, that's definitely crossed the line with me. And I'm going to clearly communicate that to them. But I always frame it from a place of being confrontational, and I always frame it from a place of solutions. Of like, hey, I'm going to share this with you. This is probably going to piss you off, but it's something that you need to hear. Like, your attitude is not good, and that's why your result is not good right now. And we really need to work on the way that you think about your problems and the way that you bring them to this relationship. And look, the way that people choose to respond is their choice. All you can do is be a lighthouse, a shining example of what's possible, and the way they choose to respond is up to them. The fork in the road that they choose to cross is up to them. You're going to have some people in this life who just walk this beautiful path and transform, and you're going to have other people who struggle, and you cannot be responsible for that. You have to just focus on what you can do. Last part, time chunking. So one of the things that I think can happen when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're trying to have a good day, is you just feel overwhelmed. Overwhelm is common, right? You feel overwhelmed, you feel spread thin, you get to the point where you just procrastinate on basic stuff. You think to yourself, man, how do I do anything? I just feel totally overloaded, right? Especially if you're a parent, you're a business owner, I get it. Now, part of it is that's why I put such an emphasis on health, because if you have better health, you have more energy. If you have more energy, you'll be in a better mood. If you're in a better mood, you make better decisions. You typically have more bandwidth to navigate more stuff. I see that with a lot of the operators that I work with. But the time chunking, obviously, so you have some people that are very, very rigid. So they're like, I want a time block every 15 minutes of my schedule from 7 a.m. through to 5 p.m. And it's like this big color-coded Google calendar. It's just like stressful to me, especially if you have children, because those kids don't have they're not on a time clock. They will have their moments and their meltdowns when they choose to have their moments and meltdowns. And they're not being mindful of your calendar. So what I tell people to do when you're feeling overloaded and you're feeling overwhelmed is, rather than thinking, okay, I have to work out at 10 a.m. and I have to do XYZ at 10:15 and I have to do this at 11 o'clock, I would say block time chunks. So say to yourself, okay, between 8 a.m. and 12, here are the 2 to 4 action items that I want to get done. Between 12 and 3, here are the 2 to 4 action items I want to get done. Between 3 and 6, here are the other 2 to 4 action items I want to get done. And it doesn't matter what order you get them done in. And I would even go a step further and say, even if you don't do it to your full capacity. So let's say you're having a really challenging day, stuff's going on, and you're contemplating skipping a workout. Rather than skipping it and doing either hitting a home run and doing like a full gut-busting 90-minute workout, or nothing, which is a 0 out of 10, what would it look like to do a 5 out of 10? What would it look like to do a 3 out of 10 even on a really challenging day? So you work in a spectrum. So not only are you not thinking binary, I'm either going to do it or I'm not, you work on a spectrum of like, out of 10, can I be a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 out of 10? And you're thinking in terms of time chunking rather than specific timing. Okay, between morning and noon, I need to do these things. And I will tell you, what it does is it gives you some parameters to work within. It gives you some way of like channeling your focus and keeping on top of things. But it gives you some degree of adaptation where when you're dealing with life and other people and challenges and children, it allows you to be intuitive enough where you're not freaking out and having a meltdown because you can't stick to your super rigid schedule. Then what happens is you go into a contraction phase because you start getting all negative and overwhelmed and flustered that you're not getting anything done, and you basically have a panic attack, right? Any other pieces that I would say are really valuable to just quickly note is your environment shapes your state. So you want to make sure that your environment around you inspires you. If you've ever seen my Superhuman gym, I always get people comment about my gym. When I have the Amazon guys come and drop orders off, everyone's always talking about how cool it is. The walls are black, there's LEDs everywhere, I've got these beautiful murals on the walls, great equipment in here, and people are like, damn, dude, that's awesome. I designed it this way with my walking pad and my standing desk in here, with some artificial bamboo plants and things. I designed it this way because I wanted to be in a place that inspires me. I even have gold and silver coins sitting on my office, on my work table, on my standing desk. So every day I'll look at these like beautiful gold and silver coins. And it just reminds me of value. It reminds me of wealth. It reminds me of, I just like the shiny stuff, And I just keep it there almost like as a visual prompt. It just works for me. And so I share this stuff with you guys because if you're just in a sterilized, boring environment, or if you're in a dirty, chaotic, messy environment, that's like an extension of what's going on internally. So I would tell you to start cleaning that up little bit by little bit. And again, as to not get overwhelmed, because if your whole house is a total mess, you'll be overwhelmed and you won't do any of it. So start with just like your office space. Just start with your immediate vicinity. Start with that first. And then work to your kitchen, and maybe you just do your pantry first. Break it down and do a little bit every week, every day. Because I promise you, your physical environment does have an effect on your state. It really, really does. And so make it inspiring, make it beautiful. Even if you don't necessarily live in a place where you love it, you can still make your place that you live in as beautiful as possible. Take a little bit of pride in your space. Take a little bit of pride in your environment. Take a little bit of pride in yourself, in your own appearance. Is your hair all long and unkempt, and is your face all sort of unshaven and ungroomed? Have you not been showering or brushing your teeth? Like, these are things that are reflective of your psychology. Start putting a little bit of that effort and pride into your stuff around you, including yourself. I think the last thing, beyond just thinking about expansion as a choice, is speak from the heart. Man, a lot of what I share on social media is like a digital journal. I always think to myself, what is a message I need to hear today, and what is a message I know other people would value? And I just speak from the heart. I don't just share the highlight reel. I'm not just sharing flashy stuff. I share the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. You know, I talked a lot about Lauren's grandmother passing away the other week. I shared a lot about that. I've shared a lot about the ebbs and flows in this journey. People want to feel the real you. When they can feel that connection to you, it will just heighten the way that you live. So stop lurking in the background. Stop contracting so hard. You know, when you do that and you just isolate yourself, you make life so much more challenging. And just realize that expansion is a choice. You know, in a world full of contraction, which is fear-driven, withdrawal, scarcity, cost-cutting, I'll do this at some other point in the future when insert story, insert excuse, versus expansion, which is growth, action, leadership, no procrastination. The best version of you expands, even under pressure. So you remind yourself of this today, that we all go through these cycles. It's like a natural law. And it doesn't mean that the contraction phases are bad, but very often when you go through a contraction phase, it can almost like propel you and act like the springboard into the next expansion phase. So you've got to remind yourself when you're going through a challenging season, sometimes that setback is setting you up for a big comeback, right? Like, make your mess your message. Make your mess your message. So go out there today and just remember, in a world full of contraction, expansion is a choice. That we pull physical levers, we pull psychological levers, we combine the two. And you need to think to yourself, who do I need to become? And that wealthy, fit, healthy, vibrant person, what behaviors and decisions do they make today? How do they move through the day? Do they procrastinate a lot, or do they move on things quickly? Are they positive about challenging situations? How do they structure their day? What do their habits look like? How do they connect with people? How do they pour into other people and make other people feel? And you ask yourself that question multiple times through the day, I promise you, it will act like a compass. So go out there today, guys. Be that lighthouse. Be that superhuman. Be that business athlete. You know, the world needs more people willing to step up. The world needs more leaders. And it doesn't mean that you're going to go through perfect flow states and expansions all the time. Sometimes you'll do a lot of these things well and you'll still get kicked in the face with a contraction. And that's just part of life. It's just part of embracing this journey and becoming a wiser version of yourself. So go out there today, guys. Lock it in. If you got some value out of this, share it. Let people know about this podcast. And if you want help being in those environments, getting into those expansion phases, locking it in and becoming that person you know you need to become, reach out and get into my coaching tribe. Get into the environment, guys, and we can go from there.